I'm Tony Shepard, 30 years tracking organized retail crime and working major busts.
And I'm Johnny Custer, 30 years turning loss prevention into a profit-driving powerhouse with analytics and strategy.
Every episode, we break down the latest in retail risk, security, and total loss prevention. What's real, what's hype, and what's coming next.
And yeah, we'll probably have some fun along the way.
Welcome to It's Your Loss with Tony and Johnny. Retail crime, retail loss, the future of loss prevention.
Hey, Tony.
Hey, Johnny. Good to see you.
Long time no see. We have a special guest with us today, Mr. Scott Glenn, the Enterprise Vice President of Asset Protection with the Home Depot. Welcome, Scott.
Hey, guys. Good to see you all. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So let's get started. Scott, tell us a little bit about how you have, I don't want to use the word ended up, but how have you progressed your career to one of the biggest retailers in the world, heading up that asset protection team?
Look, I would say, we talk to a lot of our friends and colleagues in this, and it's unfortunately not really a very different story, right? A lot of us just fall into it. I think some of us had delusions of grandeur. Some of us got to varying stages of that. I think, out of college, I ended up working for the Treasury Department. I'm expected to, work for ATF for a little longer than I did, but I decided that government service was not what I really wanted to do for the next 20 plus years of my career. And so I was able to kind of fall back to the retail space and fell into the AP industry like many folks did. And, was lucky enough to work for a great company at Target during the time. I know you had King on here a little bit ago and listened to his, words of wisdom. And, King was the VP when I was there. And not that I had a ton of interaction with him at, as a single store and then ultimately a district AP manager at Target, but certainly the lessons and the structure of what a good AP program looks like, what a great training program looks like, were all, embedded in me early in my career. That said, it was a journey from there. And, I would say for personal reasons, for professional reasons, I made some changes, met my wife at Target. That wasn't going to be a good story, right? So we're not going to end up working for the same company for a long term. So I made the choice to leave at that point. I went to work for this little unknown company out of Milwaukee called Kohl's, who was 240 stores and nobody had ever heard about at the time when I joined the organization. So, and I had a great ride there. Look, when I left, we were 1,000 plus stores, and 10 years later, we had grown into a national powerhouse. And so from there, I made the decision to take on a larger role, took on maybe a little bit of a challenge in going to a company in Sears that was frankly having some challenges coming out of their merger and, some financial struggles and trying to figure out their identity. But it was an amazing opportunity to take on a bigger platform, to go work in the corporate office, to take on some different types of roles within the organization. And then ultimately, as you know, Johnny, we worked together there for a little while, was the CSO there. Unfortunately, that company was starting to wind down, and I was lucky enough that Home Depot did come calling and asked me to come over here and lead the organization over here. So that's kind of the journey that I took during that time.
Wow. That's three completely different retail models I heard mentioned in there.
Yeah.
How was that experience going from Target with that kind of structured merchandise platform over to Kohl's, which was a little bit more off-price discounting?
Yeah, but they did operate a little differently, even though they were technically a department store, they operated with, the front end checkout, single point of entry, very little mall, presence. It was very much a strip mall type of scenario. So there were, despite kind of the different merchandising categories that they played in, they were very much similar in the sense that, they operated like a discounter to a certain degree. And so to me, it wasn't a huge challenge, but also I was like, in my mid to late 20s, I was dumb and I didn't really know much about what I was doing. So I don't know that I really thought through a lot of that. I just did it. You know what I mean? I just adapted and changed as I learned. So I think that's kind of the, that probably fell in my favor at that point.
I did some LinkedIn stalking because as much as I know about you, I didn't know the entire story. So I wanted to kind of get an idea of where you came from and how all of these things transpired. And Scott, you were really propelled into leadership roles pretty quickly. you have any advice for some of our listeners on what skills or traits that you think would be critical for someone in this business to move into a position, someone that aspires to be more like Scott Glenn?
I don't know that that would be my aspiration, but maybe we could talk about that. But there's definitely a few things I talk to my team about, right? So, I get the question, I do a lot of interviews, bring people into leadership positions in the role. And, I get the questions like, what are the, skill sets that you're looking for? And my answer is pretty universal. The first and foremost, the absolute requirement is you have to have an intellectual curiosity about yourself, right? You have to be somebody who, like, I recommend the book Question Behind the Question. I'm a big fan of Six Sigma and the 5 Whys. And, you have to understand in order to execute type of mentality. So that intellectual curiosity is extremely important to me. Just if you don't have that, it doesn't matter what the problem you're trying to solve is, you're not going to figure it out because you're not asking the right questions. And so, that is something that I put a lot of I put a lot of stock in from that standpoint. I would say beyond that, as you continue to grow, sometimes you get very locked into, the narrow problem in front of you, and you're not dealing with the broad point of view on things. And how does asset protection, loss prevention fit into the broader retail picture, and having that strategic vision about understanding not only where you want your organization to go or your team to go, but where does it fit? My analogy is always I love Italian food. So I'm a pizza guy, right? So like retail's a pizza and AP is a slice of the pizza. The pie's not complete without it. It's not good without it, but it's also not biggest part of the pizza, right? So it's just a slice of the pie, and there's other slices around. You got to learn to work with it within that strategy and that vision of that. And then I probably just kind of end it with the third one that I talk to my team about a lot, and that's just like interpersonal relationships, interpersonal savvy, whatever you want to call it. That this is a people business. Nothing gets done without having the right people on your team or having the right relationships with other people outside of your team. And I would tell you that I probably learned that a little later than I should have in my career. I would say, I used to kind of just muscle through some stuff and, just push through some things with the team. Hey, we're right. This is the right way to go, as opposed to just like, hey, let's get everybody on board and try to figure that out. So I would say, if nothing else, my advice is, try to master those 3 early on. They will carry you into a lot of other skills and areas and a lot of other conversations that you need to have.
Yeah. Hey, Tony, I keep hearing the same word in these discussions, right? I keep hearing the word curious. Be curious.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I think I just want to comment on one thing that you said, Scott, that you started too late on that. I would make the argument, and I'm certainly not going to say any names on this podcast, but there are some folks now that still are in that, like, instead of getting folks on board, they just kind of try to push it through. And I just feel like, A, that's not the best approach, and B, I just think that it's exhausting. I mean, it's got, wouldn't it be better, right, to just build those relationships and get that, make things happen like that, as opposed to just constantly being in a battle with folks in other departments, et cetera. I just think that makes complete sense.
Agreed.
Scott, you talk about creating these relationships and the success that you've had. At what point, though, did you realize that you weren't just a part, and maybe you haven't, I don't know. But from my perspective, and I know from a lot of other people's perspective, you're not just a part of the industry. You are one of the handful of people that are actually kind of helping to shape the direction, the growth, and the word I like to use, the evolution of loss prevention. Let's be honest. When we first started, we were bad guy catchers. That's what we did. We chased shoplifters. We were told to stay in our lane. That is changing. At what point did you realize, or at what point did you make the conscious decision that you didn't just want to be a part, you wanted to lead the direction?
Yeah, look, it's a great question. There's probably, to your point, an unconscious and a conscious side of this, right? There's, I grew up playing sports. Grew up playing baseball. I always wanted to kind of be, a leader in things, whether it was a leader of my team or the captain of your team or whatever it was. And so, there's probably a little bit of an inner drive to that to a certain degree. But, I would point specifically to your question. I didn't know Jim Lee very well until I got to Sears. And when I got to Sears through Bill Titus and some of the other folks there, I got to know Jim really well and know what an amazing person he is and all the things that he's accomplished. And Jim took an interest in me and asked me to join the magazine board at one point, asked me to join the foundation board at one point. And it was probably somewhere in there that it was like, there's a chance to cast a shadow a little bit with this platform and kind of shape where we were going and shape the conversations and help, at least from my perspective, my humble perspective, to just say, this is where I think we should be going. And I think that's probably where it dawned on me that you can do a little bit more for the folks that are coming behind you.
Yeah. I can tell you the moment that I realized that you were not the traditional VP of LP, that you were someone that was going to change the industry. 2013, 2014-ish, you made the conscious decision to take your team and just change the name, which really had a staggering effect on the direction that your department took, the focus that you had, how you measured success, and more importantly, how you communicated that to the people upstairs. You went from the VP of loss prevention to the VP of asset protection at Sears Holdings to the vice president of asset and profit protection. Subtle, but a big change. What was your thought process in making that change, and how did you kind of change the attitude of not only your team, but the operators you were partnering with?
Yeah. So it's, I would love to tell you it was completely altruistic and like I was just like ahead. Some of it was, and there's so much to unpack on this, but like as an organization that maybe is having some financial struggles and collapsing a little bit, and if you're doing a good job, this is where you get asked to do some more things. We get asked to take on some additional responsibilities. We get asked to do some things because we have shown that we can take on some responsibility. And so we were kind of, in that place, of all things. At one point, they asked us to take on anti-money laundering and some of the other, financial, reporting concerns. We already had corporate security. We had executive protection. We had aviation until we got rid of our airplanes. And then we got all these other things. And, it did become less about just the shrink number. It did become just a lot less about the, the impact of safety on your financials. And it was just more about like, can you do more with the mindset that you have to go be curious and go fix problems that may be outside of your natural piece of it? And I said, sure, we can do that. But at that point, again, it kind of said, well, we're not traditional AP anymore. We are broadening our horizons into profit protection and earnings and making sure that we're having an impact on margins and all the other things. And so it just made a lot of sense for us. And frankly, we needed to rebrand just to create a little excitement, create some new positions to it wasn't just a rebrand. It was, we added new roles, we leveled some positions, we created senior, we called them different names, but essentially we had district AP managers and senior district AP managers. And we had other types of roles depending on the vertical that you were in, whether you were in home services or whether you were in supply chain or whether you were in investigations or whatever the place was. And so it was a chance to kind of say, we're having a little bit of malaise, if you want to call it that here. Let's inject some newness into the organization as well as add some incremental value of what we were trying to do there. And it was, a little bit before the old, it was kind of the precursor to total loss, right? Total retail loss.
Yeah. And it wasn't just personnel changes. It wasn't just changing the name. It wasn't communication. You were also in the trenches. When we first met, you were already probably 7-8 years before, at least it became mainstream, digging into every type of profit eroder that could impact a retailer. You were looking at everything from, I remember looking at maintenance costs and rent and all of the different things that impact the profitability of the company. How has that taken hold in the industry?
Again, I'll go back and say, to be completely transparent, we were looking into those things to try to save the company money from the fraud perspective at first. But we realized we saw other things that weren't fraud, but maybe waste, abuse, things that we could do things a little bit more efficiently in. And so again, full transparency, it was for some self-serving reasons, but I learned quickly that we could do some of those other things. The answer is no. I don't think it's broadly taken hold. And I think there's always these, ebbs and flows on things. I think, I was feeling really good 2019, 2020, even at the start of COVID and maybe even during COVID to a certain degree, that the total loss concept was going to get a little bit more traction. But as we came out of COVID, 2022, 2023, the industry kind of reverted back to some bad behaviors, and that was contraction, right? We got asked to do more things during COVID. We got asked to step out of our lanes. We got asked to be a little bit more, broad-based in our approach. Budgets were getting bigger. Everything was like, just survive the virus, survive the pandemic. And And everybody who can contribute can and will. And then, again, slowly as things started, coming away from that 23, 24, you started seeing a little bit of moving off of that and, contracting. So I felt good for a while. And I think there's places where, and there's companies that are doing a great job on it. But when you look at the industry as a whole, not so much. I mean, like there's inflection points. There's different, places where you can point to and go, it's a positive sign that we're moving in the right direction. But I'll even tell you here, like, this company has a long history with AP and it's invest, divest, and we've been trying to flatten that out, and we have flattened that out over the last 8 years, and we're in an invest, place right now. But getting them to willingly get into that total retail loss mindset, we're not there yet. I mean, we're progressing. We're moving in the right direction. People are not throwing us out of the room when we bring it up. Like that's a step, right? So, but is it where I would expect it to be today? No. Do I have room for growth? Sure. We have a lot of opportunity there.
It doesn't help that you open the newspapers or you get online. I said newspapers. Does anybody read a newspaper anymore? When you get online and you look at all the news sites and you look at all the news on TV, it's all around smash and grabs. It's around flash robs, and it's around organized retail crime, which, don't get me wrong, we know is a huge, huge issue. But there's a balance that has to be there, right? Yeah, we got to focus on this, but we also have to focus on that. Now, moving over to the ORC issue, this is something you've also had a big passion for. Is that because you've grown up dealing with it? Where did you kind of get your... I'm assuming it was out of necessity, but where did you get the passion for combating ORC and kind of leading that charge? We're going to talk about some of the stuff you've done to lead that charge. It's impressive.
Well, so it's interesting. Most of my career, I wasn't a big believer in ORC. And I even go back to my time at the Treasury Department where we investigated gun running, human trafficking, drug smuggling, you name it. And every once in a while, you'd see some connection to retail, the monetization effort of retail, going back into the 90s, right? But I didn't put it together at that point. Throughout my career at Target, you saw pieces of it. At Kohl's, you saw a lot less of it, a little bit more just traditional shoplifting and things like that. At Sears, we had fits and starts with it. I saw it. There was a little bit. Frankly, I thought it was maybe a little bit overhyped, a little sensationalized. It wasn't until I came here that I became a disciple of this is real, this is big, this is more insidious than you might think about. And it wasn't because like I got here and just had an epiphany. It was because I got here, there was already work being done on it. And I think because the way our stores are laid out, the brands that we have, the price points that we have, the accessibility that we have, the customer that we have, the pro tie-in to what we do, all of those led us to data that said, these are the ones that are actually hurting us the most. And it's a small population of 5 to 10% that are driving 75% of our malicious impact. And so it's a clarity I want to make. We separate our shrink numbers into maliciously driven and operationally driven shrink numbers. And we have a really good science behind how much is in each bucket. But of our malicious, we know these guys are responsible for a very, very significant portion of it. And then unfortunately, we've just had, call it in COVID and beyond, very highly publicized, unfortunate incidents of people being hurt, people being put in harm's way. Unfortunately, we've had a couple of incidents where people were killed in our stores in ORC scenarios. You can't help but notice, and you can't help but say this is a problem that we have to address and we have to deal with. I give a lot of credit to our former CEO, our CEO when I got here, Craig Menear, who he's like, you've convinced me, and I'm willing to talk about it and put resources behind it. And he did, and he gave us resources that we needed, that we have developed now over time, that have built this kind of interconnected bubble that helps us protect against it, detect it, resolve it, get ahead of this, and frankly push it out of our element a little bit more than we have in the past.
Yeah, Scott, I actually, just a quick story. I didn't understand ORC at all. It wasn't until 2004. And that's when I transferred from Detroit to Houston with CBS. Mm-hmm. And I was hearing from store managers, like these groups going around. And I literally, I'll never forget my response. I was like, guys, I just transferred to Detroit. Like, you're shopping shoplifting issue is not that. I literally remember having this conversation, and then they were showing me these videos of these groups, and of course, in the CVS world, it's mostly the over-the-counter
Sure.
medication, right? And they're showing these videos of just these massive, large quantity, right? Like, and I was just blown away. And it wasn't like 3 videos. It was, I mean, tons of videos in the
Yeah.
same groups, right? The same,
Yeah.
organized groups that were traveling. And so I think that obviously that was when I understood, that some of the significance, and then
Right.
it grew from there. But I also think that, going back to Johnny's point about the headlines, I think that you hit the nail on the head. It's not just about the theft itself, right? It's not just about the shrink. It's about all the other things. Certainly the violence, right, and the safety issues are top priority, right, 100%, and that's why it gets a lot of the coverage. But even just the financial impact of not having things, right, not having things in stock, right. So you testified, right, before on ORC to Congress. What do you think most people still misunderstand about the scale and impact of ORC, in your opinion?
It's super obvious that when you talk to people who don't get the reality of what's happening, they think this is, Johnny walking in on a Saturday and taking a hammer and going home to finish his project. That's what they think ORC is. And what they don't understand is the tentacles and the nexus and the fact that this is a most of the ORC is there's 2 branches of ORC. There's the, hey, I'm just trying to get rich, being a criminal. And then there's the, I'm trying to monetize other crimes, which is your drug running, your gun running, your human trafficking, your money laundering, all the the multinational, organizations that are involved in that. And so when we kind of went on this journey of trying to educate attorneys general, governors, mayors, chiefs of police, because we did have the data and we did have the information, we had the science, the data science that showed us the correlation to drug overdoses and ORC thefts in certain markets and certain places. And we would go talk to them about this, and we would show them how many of the cases that are important to them. Drug running is important to attorney generals. It's important to the federal government, money laundering, all those things. And they're like, so you can give me this in to something that I am already working on that's important, and you can probably help me get these guys or girls faster than I would ever be able to do on my own. That's when the wheels started to spin with a lot of these folks. And a lot of people don't even know we actually, we're helping to set up and stand up and train these task forces in certain states. And think about Utah and Washington and Illinois and Florida and here in Georgia, all these places in 2019, 2020, and educating them on this. And that's where I think it started to get a little bit more of connecting the dots on this is important, right? This is not just a retail issue. This is a retail issue that affects my consumer, that affects my tax base, that affects my employment opportunities. And I'm now speaking for policymakers and lawmakers that are turning around and saying, this affects my whole community and it affects my people, frankly, that I want to vote for me. So I better start thinking about it a little bit differently. And I think that's where, we started to get a little bit more momentum behind us on this.
Scott, in your heart, you're an LP guy, right? I know you're leading
Sure.
big companies. You're speaking in front of a lot of people. You're well known in our industry, but now you're standing in front of Congress. What was that like? I mean, on one hand, it had to be very cool. Was it nerve-wracking, or were you just focused on mission, ready to go?
So, I've actually testified in front of a lot of state congresses and legislatures and all that stuff, but it's different. It's the United States, it's the federal government. So, I'm a historian, and frankly, I was an architecture major in college to start with. So I also love the building and the grandeur, and I'm taking it all in, and I'm impressed by all this stuff. And, part of you goes, this is really cool experience. It's really good. But I was very comfortable with the subject matter. So I don't think anybody was going to throw me on the subject matter. I think what you always worry about, and unfortunately it's the way, we prep for these things, is which side are you on? These are bipartisan conversations. And look, to be fair, on this issue, we have a lot of bipartisan support in the Congress on this, but you never, we are a big corporation. Not everybody agrees with everything we do. Not everybody agrees with every policy that we have. We have people that donate to certain parties, and you're always worried about where's the zinger coming from, out of left field that, you don't want to have a conversation with about in public, or on the record, frankly. That puts more, in that scenario, that put more concern in me than anything about talking about this problem, because I know this problem. I know we have a problem here. I know what the solutions are. I know what help we need from the federal government. And it was all about just getting that message out there and making sure that we could be very convincing without somebody coming out of left field and, putting a chicken wing on you and
Yeah.
trying to handcuff you a little bit.
You did a great job with it, and I know the industry appreciates it as a whole.
It's a great experience and certainly something that hopefully we're hearing here maybe in Q2, May, June, July-ish, if we can get some of this that we'll finally get Corca over the hump. I mean, advanced out of committee, 100% support from both Republicans and Democrats. It's not a controversial issue, other than maybe because it's tied to HSI right now. That's causing a little bit of angst. But at the end of the day, HSI has been an incredible partner on this. They've been a leader on this at the federal level for a long time, and so we just need to continue the push.
Yeah, I'm optimistic, Scott, on that. And I think that one thing I'm sure is going to happen, right, is that, knock on wood, hopefully it's going to go through. But I know that your team will be, what happens, right, when law passes is you got to educate folks, right, and law enforcement, prosecutors, et cetera. And I know your team will be out there making sure that they're familiar with that bill, because otherwise, if it just passes and people just aren't going to use it, right?
Yeah.
So I know your folks will be doing that. One of the things
we saw that with Inform, right? So not
Absolutely.
to cut you, not only did we see, that got it over the hump, valuable tool. Not everybody really understood how to use it, and then we found a little loophole, right? Peer-to-peer reseller loophole that we had to kind of go back, and we're still working on trying to fix that piece of it. So, but you're right. It's going to be incredibly important. But there's, that's like the start of the battle, not the end of it.
Yeah, absolutely. ORC itself obviously continues to evolve over the years. What things are you and your team looking at? What concerns do you have looking ahead as to the evolution of ORC?
I think it's like a lot of other things. Technology continues to help bad people do bad things in different ways. And, we're always behind it. We're always, 6-12 months behind. I mean, we, the industry, is like when the scam or the fraudster or whatever it is that's happening, we start to hear about it. We see little pieces of it. Then you realize it's really something. And then you figure out, how do I address it? And by the time you address it, 6-12 months have gone by. And then they're on to the next thing, right? So the rise of technology and AI, I think the things around phone number spoofing, voice spoofing, the things that, people are able to do today that we didn't have to deal with when we were running around with pagers and quarters in our pockets. So that was not something I had to be concerned about. But, that's kind of where we're at on it. It's interesting, even we've had a couple of interesting cases in our world where the bad guys had no inventory. And so we're seeing this rise of what we call just-in-time stealing is probably the best way to do it. You think about just-in-time fulfillment, in the supply chain, but they're just taking stock pictures directly off of our website. They're putting it on, Facebook Marketplace or whatever the place may be. And then when the order comes in, they just go steal it. And it's actually relatively smart, because you're not going to find them with a warehouse full of unproductive inventory, if you want to call it that, right? Like it's if they go out and steal 50 hammer drills from us, and people are buying I don't know, pressure washers or blowers, well, you're sitting on inventory that's not really helpful. But if somebody, you put up 1,000 different pictures on your site, when they hit the order button, they just go get it. Like, that's just what they do. And so, it's interesting how the criminals adapt. And at the end of the day, when you finally catch them, they're also not being, caught with $100,000 worth of product in their garage or in their warehouse. So it's an interesting little twist that we've started to see over the last, 12 months.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's it is interesting, to your point, which is posting what you're selling. You don't even actually have it yet, and so then you've got to steal it afterwards. It's
That's right.
To your point, it makes a lot of sense from a business standpoint. Hey, your team. When I first got to Think LP, right, and this going back, it's actually going to be 5 years, believe it or not, here in a couple of weeks. But when I first got here, your team helped us build out our complex investigation module, right? There wasn't a process, and I work for Think LP, but I'm going to slam Think LP right now, because when I used it right at CVS, I was frustrated because it wasn't designed to be able to aggregate cases. It was
Sure.
frustrating, right? Because it was more for like your traditional case, right? And so your team was instrumental, by the way. And I thank you, thank all of them. I mean, they're great folks and they helped us build that out. But at that time, what gaps were you trying to solve? And how has that helped you to be able to manage the investigations? And that was before, remember, we had crime linking. This was just
Yeah.
being able to manage the cases. Just your thoughts on that.
We are two things. You guys know I'm a data guy. I like data. I like the analytics side of it. I think that it can help us get to the real priorities faster. So philosophically, that's where I come from. And when I got to Home Depot, I expected to walk in and they just have this big black box of, just amazing systems and tools that were just going to hand everything to us on a silver platter. And came pretty apparent to me pretty quickly that while we are data rich, we are insight poor. And so we just had a gap, and I wouldn't slam think too bad, because I think at that point where they were, and then post sale, a lot of interruption with strategy and all that stuff. The new team coming in, trying to get to know the customers and the needs and all that stuff. And so I say all that to say, like, we just kept pounding the door saying, we need this aggregator, we need this aggregator, we need this linkage, we need this insight, we need the be able to pull it was before we had some other technologies even that are available to us today, where the guys that are up in South Carolina are the same guys in Georgia, they're the same guys in Florida, and we didn't have that linkage together. And we would, like a lot of people, we would just prosecute them in Georgia for a minor crime versus a broader crime that potentially could be a federal offense or something. And so this has just helped us get the insight of that black box and help us move faster. I have every metric in the world for my teams, but days from the time we get the case to the days we hand it off to law enforcement, the days the law enforcement takes it to the days it goes to court, and those times have just compressed for us. And that's just a productivity issue, right? So as those times compress, we get to move on to the next thing. I got a backlog of 600 plus ORC cases that our team's working on. We'll do 700, 800 this year. We always have the next case to move on to. But every day I don't deal with it, they're stealing from me. And so, how do we just compress this time frame? How do we move things faster? How to become more productive, more efficient? That's kind of the impetus behind why we needed something like this, because there's no human that can process the information the way that an aggregator like, crime linking can.
Yeah, no, it's been obviously great, and I'm glad that you guys are on board now. And I know I've heard from the team that some of them I worked with in the past, right? Done surveillance with, done cases with, and the excitement around that. One of the things you guys track as well is your investigative expenses and even your equipment you track in the system. How important is that visibility to your team?
Well, if you want more toys, you got to justify the budget, right? So it's, again, I go back to, I've never worked for a company that's more, we'll just call it financially disciplined than we are. And obviously that shows in the way we, put things out there. I always say, we have people here that the government listens to on data around housing and the way things work and our financial forecasts and all these other things. And so we take advantage of any opportunity to do that, because that's the environment we work in. And it just becomes it becomes an investment catalyst for us, right? Obviously we need to make sure that we're using resources effectively. We also need to make sure that we are, properly requesting funding for future state and how do we, budget for things like that. So it just makes it an easier place to do it, right? It's all in one place for us, and we can easily just extract the information and say, oh, this is what we need. This is our annual kind of recurring costs and things we need to look at from a, incremental investment perspective as well. So it's been a like a cherry on top, if you want to call it that, from a budgeting and financial discipline perspective.
Well, one of the things, this is off topic a little bit here, but I guess not off topic, but one of the things that we've noticed since we launched crime linking is the amount, when I was at CVS, I was always very particular, right? The groups, they were very specific, right? So you'd have groups that were targeting cosmetics. They would just never touch OTC, right?
Mm-hmm.
You had groups that were targeting OTC. They wouldn't touch cosmetics. We had groups that were targeting like CVS and Walgreens and Rite Aid at the time that didn't go in Walmart or Kroger, et cetera.
Yeah.
And since we've launched our crime, one of the things that was surprising to me, quite frankly, was the amount of crossover across segments, right? And I wonder if the example you gave earlier about they're posting stuff before they take it, right? I'm just curious as to your thoughts on the amount, so one of the first examples we had literally when we first launched Crime Leaking was somebody pushing out bed sheets in one company and I think it was like power drills in another. And it was clearly
Right.
the same group, right?
Right.
And I just didn't anticipate that happening. I was just curious is that a surprise to you? Are you guys used to doing that? Is your team used to working with all these like softline
Are
retailers
you
on
s-
cases, or is that a new development?
you saying the bad guys aren't loyal anymore? They don't have they're
They're
not on the
not.
loyalty
They're
program?
not. And maybe they weren't the whole time. I didn't know it. That's why I'm asking.
But they're loyal to cash. That's about it, right? Like, yeah. No, I don't think you're wrong on it. I do believe that's probably another evolution we've seen over the last couple of years. You're right. Like a booster, a fence, they were in a product line. And maybe it's just because they knew the people that they could sell it to and get it to. And that was the right thing. But I think what's changed is, again, it's just money's fungible. It is what it is. Products, I don't care whether I can get $50 for a drill or $50 for a couple of boxes of Tylenol. I think it's just an evolution that the bad guys have really picked up on, that I don't need to be so specific. There's a market for everything. And if I can just find the place and maybe it's the online side of it, right? Like maybe I used to have to go to a flea market or an apartment complex to sell this product. And those people there, they only bought aspirin or they only bought power drills. I don't know. Maybe that's the difference and online, it's the world, right? I can sell to the world. So it doesn't really matter what the product I'm trying to monetize is. But you're not wrong. It's definitely happening.
You mentioned data a little bit ago. AI is a real thing. How do you see that impacting your world and the world of your team? And how dependent do you think that we as an industry are eventually going to be on it?
So we are using AI in our daily routines today. I mean, machine learning, not data analytics, true AI. Everything from monitoring mailboxes that get 25,000 emails a year and trying to extract patterns without a human having to go through it, understanding shrink concerns that are raised from the field and on-hand issues and all these other things, to our investigative mailboxes, to our HR mailboxes, to our aware line, all that stuff, completely, in an AI mode of applying the technology. We use it for everything from building presentations to extracting outlier analysis. We're directing scheduling through AI of our field teams. We are sending directed tasking to our fields based on AI learning, meaning there's 1,000 things that a district AP manager, a regional AP manager, divisional AP director, anybody could be doing. There's 1,000 things an ORC investigator or a CI internal investigator could be doing. There's 1,000 things the analysts and teams sitting outside my office can be doing. But are they doing the most important things to the organization? Are they prioritized in a way that says, do this first, do this first, do this first, and then go do the other stuff? And that's how we're evolving our approach to it. So the short answer is it's here, it's real. I don't know what it's going to look like 12 to 18 months from now, because 6 months ago it was a proof of concept, and now it's a daily part of our routines that we're ingesting every day. So I can only imagine how fast the evolution is going to continue to move in this space as adoption takes place, as more people get into the space, as data centers are being built, as computing power continues to grow. It's a little scary to a certain degree, but I think the approach we're taking is that it's a productivity and efficiency driver. And it's making sure that the entirety of the organization, 4,000-ish people from an AP perspective, are all rowing in the same direction, not all doing their different things in different geographies and different verticals, whether it's supply chain, stores, rental, all the different places that we have people making decisions. And I want to be careful, because I'm not saying we don't want people to make decisions. We just want to guide them in the most important prioritization of those decisions. They're still going to rely on humans to go out and do the things that we do. You're not going to put an AI robot out there doing surveillance from a vehicle, or doing on-hand change investigations, or working on markdown training, or whatever is happening, accuracy at the front end. There's all these things that people still have to do. This just helps them do it more effectively and more efficiently. So long-winded answer saying, yeah, it's here. It's definitely part of what we do. It's going to be interesting to see how it continues to evolve and how we can continue to me, it's just how do we just continue to raise the bar on it?
A lot of retailers are not anywhere near what you're doing. they're just not there. What is your advice for them, and what do they invest in? Do they invest in education for their team on just how to use this stuff? Do they invest in the technology and companies that are providing it?
Yeah.
What's the attack strategy?
I think twofold, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say we are blessed to have scale, right? We have a lot of things that we can leverage, and I know not everybody has that. But what my advice is, everybody has a CTO, everybody has a technology organization. If you're not buying them coffee, like, once a week and saying, here's the problems I'm trying to solve, here's the problems I'm trying to solve, as you're solving the problems for the company, don't forget about me, because a lot of the same technology can be harnessed for our purposes. We have 5 data scientists on my team. We're lucky that we have people that can point at our business and say, I'm your connection to IT. I'm the one that will drive all this change for you. You show me your mission, you show me your problems, I'll help you solve it. If you don't have that, somebody's got to be the bridge to that. Somebody's got to be the connective tissue for that. And so I'm dead serious. Like, I would make sure that your IT folks, know the people. Somebody's working on data science in your organization. Somebody's solving problems that could easily be adapted to some of the challenges you have. You just got to make your voice heard, and that's how I would start. The second piece I would start with is everybody has service providers. Everybody has a camera provider, an analytics group. ThinkAP, ThinkLP, we call it ThinkAP in our group. You guys call it ThinkLP. We like ours better. But at the end of the day, what are they doing from an AI perspective? What are they doing on the back ends of their systems to build it into something that you can take advantage of? Like, challenge those service providers on every level to say, how are you thinking about it, and how does it help solve the problems that I'm having? It's great to have a nice camera system in a store, but if it's a dumb camera system, it doesn't have a VMS that has AI and analytic capabilities built out there on it, what's the point? Like, at this point, there's nobody should be using a dumb camera system at this point.
Man,
Hey, Scott, I
have
want to
coffee
follow
with
up.
your CTO.
Yeah. I want to follow
Stand
up.
outside their office waiting when they walk in with it.
With the
That's
coffee.
what I would do.
But what a 2026 piece of advice. I mean, 5 years ago, who's giving that advice and having it be meaningful? That is a huge point that we've not heard from any of our guests up to this point, but I can't stress that enough. Have that relationship.
Absolutely.
Scott, I want to get back to the technology, because I want to touch on that a little bit, but you just brought up something about the name. Just a true story. I was actually in another country, and I was sitting in a meeting, and the person next to me used ThinkLP, but they didn't know they used ThinkLP because they didn't even use the think part in the name. And I was actually having a debate with them, and it got to the point where I had to actually have them open the app, and I'm like, yeah, that's us, right? So again, at least you guys kept the think part in the name, so I
Right.
appreciate that. But going back to the technology, to your point, right? There's a lot of other vendors out there, solution partners, and obviously you guys use us heavily, and we appreciate that. And certainly you're part of our crime leaking now, which is awesome. And I know we've had a lot of success already with that. But you use other tools as well. And we don't have those other functions, right? Like we're not a camera system. We're not LPR. We're not locking carts. We're not like, what are some of the other technologies? And you can say the names if you want. If you don't want to, it's fine. But what other technologies are you using even today? I know we're talking about AI, but I know you're leveraging other tools today that we have partnerships with as well that support and make our product even better.
Yeah. I would answer that this way. If it's out there, we're probably using it or in the process of testing it, because again, we don't know what we don't know. Like, I don't want to say we know everything about what works and what's out there. And I think this space just continues to, just came back from RELA, right? I mean, it continues to evolve very quickly. So it's frankly almost impossible to keep up with like the changes and who's providing what services. And so what I would say is that our philosophy is to start in the store and secure the 4 walls of our store. This is I explain to our board and to our leadership team all the time. It's like we start there, and that starts inside the store with people, training, process execution, operational execution, some tools, cameras, some hardware, software type capabilities, all that stuff. And then from there, we project this bubble of protection outwards into the parking lots. I mean, there's a lot of there's a lot of crazy stuff happening in the law on premises protection liability these days. And so like not doing something outside of your buildings is probably derelict. Not being engaged with your communities and law enforcement is derelict. So our strategy is kind of to interweave all these different technologies. In some cases, they're ubiquitous in the sense that like they're in every one of our 2,300 stores. In some cases, they're only in certain types of stores, certain risk models, certain complexity models, but wherever they are, and whatever form they take, they're all working together. And you mentioned, yeah, we have LPR, we have, facial recognition, we have, locking cart technology, we have egress gates, automated egress gates, we have front end, computer vision. There's a lot of different things that we're doing out there. In addition, like I said, it's still a people business, and there's still people that are walking the aisles that have knowledge that you need to train, and you need to make sure they react to these situations. But it is very much this interwoven, complex bubble of things that are working together, and you pull one of them out, and it's a challenge, right? Like it becomes less effective. You find a gaping hole in something. We're trying to find the right mix of those things for the least investment possible, right? We're still here to make money, and we want to keep costs down. But you've got to find that balance of what's the right thing to do. Like there's some technologies we look at and say that is not a 2,300 stores. That's not an option. It's not necessary. It can be very, very effective in 1,000 stores, or whatever the case may be. So that's our approach. That's kind of how we're viewing these types of things. And we are always on the search of how do we reduce friction? How do we make sure that we're still being effective? How do we make sure that we, keep our leadership team and the board apprised to, what's working, what's not working, and where the investment dollars are needed to keep the results that we're seeing.
Well, listen, Scott, I can't thank you enough. We can't thank you enough for taking time out of your incredibly busy day. Normally, we like to end with a few rapid fire questions, if you don't mind, just
Sure.
to learn a little bit more about Scott and a little bit less about some of the things we've been talking about up to this point. So I'm going to throw a couple rapid fires out at you. If you feel comfortable answering, great. If you don't, that's okay too.
I get like a pass button if there's
Yeah.
Family Feud
Yeah,
pass.
just duck off camera. What's the achievement you're most proud of in your career?
I wouldn't say it's an achievement. I would say it's probably, if I think about like, when I go to the beach and stop doing this at some point, probably what I'll look back on and say, I'm proud of that, or I'm happy with that is maybe some of the people that have, maybe I've had an influence on. I could think of, maybe 10 or 12 people right now that, have worked with me and around me over the years that are, in senior positions or leading other organizations. Like at the end of the day, nobody's going to remember how much money has saved the company in 2025 or 26, but there will be people that you leave behind that are hopefully then doing the same thing and paying it forward when it comes to that. So I'd probably go with that. That's probably the biggest accomplishment is like, hopefully I can affect a few folks and help them, get to where they want to go.
Great answer. Great answer.
On that note, Scott, for those that are listening to this podcast that are early in their careers, just like we all were one day, right? You mentioned it, out there catching shoplifters or whatever it is that they're doing now, but they're early in their career. What one piece of advice would you wish that you had been given when you were early on in your career? Or what piece of advice would you give those folks that are listening right now?
Don't be an asshole.
I thought you were going to say don't chase people through the parking lot, because I know we're not supposed to we don't do that anymore.
No, seriously. Like I think, and I talked about this a little bit outside of the work on these skills, develop these skill sets, which are, we talked about really in the beginning. This is a people business. And I say that I learned that way, way too late in my career, that you don't know who you'll ever work for. You don't know who you'll ever work with. I'm not saying you got to go be friends with everybody, but you have to learn how to navigate the political environment of a corporation. And I know when I was young, I did not want to hear that. I don't play politics. That's bullshit. I'm not doing this. I was there. We were all there probably at one point. But the value that I've learned of having people speak about you or on your behalf when you're not in the room is probably the most underappreciated skill in the world. Like, if you can convince people to say good things about you when you're not there, you've probably made an impression. And conversely, look, at the end of the day, and particularly when you get to, the officer level, there are conversations about career pathing, succession planning, talent development, all the stuff that happen when you're not in the room. CEO, the executive team is sitting around listening to the HR people talk about Scott Glenn and what he does well and what he doesn't well. And here's the things that, the reason why he's not CEO. Well, you want there to be very few reasons why you're not the CEO. You want them to be saying he doesn't want to be CEO, but he maybe could be because he's got some certain skills. And so that's a relationship issue. That's it. Outside of it, like we've already done your deliverables, you're already hitting all your targets. You're all doing that. But then it comes down to how do you lead teams? How do you build teams? How do you get shit done? How do you relate to people and get along with people? That's the stuff that gets people promoted and to whatever level they want to be promoted to. And I'm making fun of like the CEO. That's not the thing. But whether you want to be in my role as the leader of the AP organization for a company, or whether you want to be the leader of the investigations team, whether you want to be the leader of the supply chain, it doesn't matter. I mean, you want those people to be saying those things about you when you're not in the room. And I think that's something that sometimes people learn a little too late.
Yeah, I think even in our industry, that's important. Right. And working with other retailers, right. Operating on different things. I mean, obviously different organizations, mentioned we're just at RELA, obviously we have NRF coming up, but I think that there's value in that collaboration, even in our industry, which is very small. And I think some folks, struggle
Yeah.
even with that. Right.
That's a great point, Tony. Like that's a great point. There's a company in North Carolina that we compete with that we don't like a lot, but I'll tell you, myself and my peer over there, we talk all the time.
Mhm.
We have the same problems. We have the same issues. We're in the same business. Scott and I are friends. We talk and I love the guy. And we share information that, to your point, like, we don't compete in this space. Obviously there are guardrails. There are things we don't talk about. There's competitive, there's trade secrets, all that stuff. But we do talk about, like, we're seeing an issue in, Boise, Idaho, and, how can our teams collaborate to, shut this down or whatever the issue may be. And so you're right. Don't keep it just inside your company. It's got to be outside. Get involved in the industry. Be that next leader that's addressing some of these problems that we have as a broader AP group.
All right. Last question. You've had a long career. We've all had long careers in the industry. We've been lucky in that way. However, every once in a while, there's an embarrassing or particularly humbling situation that pops up. Have you ever been humbled or been in a humbling situation, Scott?
I'll stay away from the embarrassing part. Honestly,
That's fair.
you guys have a broad audience. I don't want to bring myself down, but if you haven't been humbled, you're not paying attention, right? I think I've been humbled quite a few times in my career. Early on, goes back to just our last conversation. There's two roads you can take on that. You can be humbled and you can, go sit in a corner and lick your wounds and whine like a baby, or you can learn from it and you can figure out how not to make whatever that mistake was or whatever that incident was happen again. And so, yeah, no, I've definitely, I probably was humbled yesterday or Friday for depending, it still happens. It's not like you ever stop at that point, but I mean, I think it's really all about how you recover and how you learn from those types of scenarios that will help you either progress or regress in your career. And I think, do it the right way. It can just be a stepping stone from progress.
I love that.
Not dissimilar, right, to you can't control what happens all the time, but you can control how you react to what happens, right?
That's
So same.
That's it.
Any final thoughts, Tony?
No, this has been great, Scott. Again, Johnny mentioned earlier, really appreciate your time. It's been awesome. I know we've had an opportunity over the last several months to, meet at your office and even have dinner outside the building in an informal environment. But really, really appreciate your time being here. And I think that, Johnny pointed out earlier is that I think a lot of people, will listen to this and watch this. And I think there's a lot of value in what you've said. And you have made it to a certain point that people strive to get to. And so I think they'll appreciate your thoughts. So again, just can't thank you enough for participating today.
Look, happy to do it. Thank you guys for what you're doing, both with, the service provider side of it, but also the education side of it for the industry. And, I think it's always good to, have a platform where, people can hear different perspectives on leadership and approaches and all these things. I know for sure mine's not the only approach and mine's not necessarily the right approach for everybody. Listening to this and getting this messaging out there is super important, and I appreciate you guys doing it.
Scott, thanks for your time. We'll talk again soon.
All right, guys, take care.
Take care.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to It's Your Loss, where we explore the strategies, stories, and data driving the future of loss prevention. This podcast is brought to you by ThinkLP, powering loss prevention for over 200 leading retailers and helping protect people and profits around the world. If you got value from today's episode, make sure to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or YouTube so you never miss an update. Let's keep the conversation going. Follow Tony Shepard and Johnny Custer on LinkedIn for more insights, stories from the field, and industry updates between episodes. We'll be back soon with more news, more strategy, and yes, probably another crazy loss prevention story or two. Until then, keep protecting people, securing profits, and try not to let it be your loss.